All right, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I have Chief Cochran from Craig PD in Colorado. 37 years total in law enforcement, so a wealth of knowledge. Really excited to have him on the show today. So, welcome, Chief Cochran. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be with you.
Of course, I'm really looking forward to it. So, I kind of made the joke offline before we hit record that time flies when you're having fun. How have the last 37 years looked like for you so far?
It's been amazing. Obviously, ups and downs, challenges um, in the beginning, and even current day. Sometimes, why did I choose this career? But I've always maintained from the very beginning. I did it to help my family in the community I grew up in, my friends, and used to do a lot of talks with like kids in schools. And would get asked the question, why do you do it? And my number one is when I'm done, if I can look back and say I made the difference in just one person, it's all been worth it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so relatable. I think everyone who's listening, regardless of where you are in your career, has had those moments of like, man, why do I do this? Because I do believe anything worth doing has challenges. It's always going to be hard. You kind of choose your hard. But I love that sentiment of connecting with the why and why you got into this profession, why you do what you do, and using that as the driving motivator to keep going even in the valleys, because we know there's always going to be peaks and valleys. But
Absolutely.
I think we all want to live a life where we can look back on it and be proud.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say if it had been easy the entire way, I probably would not have stayed in it.
100%. That's so interesting that you said that. And I was having a conversation earlier today where I had this thought about like how lucky are we that we get to experience all of it.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to experience stress and
Yes.
joy and all the things, because one day we're going to get to the end and we're going to look back and these are going to be the good days, and we're going to want
Absolutely.
these things back. And so I really appreciate you saying that. And I think that you're exactly right. If it was all flowers and rainbows, we'd get so bored. We'd be like, we're out of here.
You would be bored out of your mind.
Yeah.
Out of your mind. Absolutely.
So 37 years ago, I know that policing looked different. Wellness certainly looked different. So give us a little bit of insight into what the landscape was when you first started, especially in the context of wellness. What did mental health look like when you started out in this career?
So I will say that 37 years ago, coming into it brand new, mental wellness was very taboo. It was not something that was discussed. A lot of times, the older officers would say, "Well, if you have a problem with this, you don't need to be in the business,"
Mm.
and that can become a cold reality um, when you're involved in an incident. And knowing that you can't talk about it at work, you were taught through the academy, you were taught in your field training, you were taught by uh, your older generation. You don't talk about it at home. And that made times very difficult. I've seen a lot of good officers, good deputies when I worked with the sheriff's office that chose to leave the career because you couldn't open up to anybody. It was a sign of weakness if you needed to. Um, Very ironic. Early in my career, riding with my sergeant in my final phase of being checked off to be alone, we were at the scene and witnessed a suicide. Um, we were within inches when this occurred, And the first thing that was asked of us when we got back in was um, we were made to feel like we were weak. And with a blunt question, uh, do either one of you need to speak to anybody? And of course, the answer was no, we don't, simply because of the way it was put. And I don't think our supervisor that asked that question meant anything bad. I had known the man for my entire life. He was an excellent officer, but that's the way he was raised.
Right.
And ultimately, a year later, the sergeant I was riding with left the job because of that. He just couldn't get rid of what we had witnessed that day. Um, so it made it difficult in those days. Um, that was the sentiment. You've got to be tough. You've got to be mentally tough. You've got to be physically tough. You don't talk about the bad times. You deal with them and you go on.
Yeah.
And looking back at those days, thank goodness we've come this far. Um, very intimidated as a young officer to think you're wrong if you felt any kind of emotion with something like that. Um, and today we've done a complete change. I think we still have some betterment that we could do. But that's harsh. That's tough.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience. And there's a few things that I kind of want to touch on. But the first thing is this idea that if you have an emotion, that means that you're not tough. And
Hmm.
I think that you're exactly correct. And, I'd love to talk a little bit about today's landscape with you too. But I think that's the conversation that has started to change, that two things can be true at once. You can be strong, you can be effective, and things can also impact you. And you can move through those things and move forward from those things with the right resources. And so I think that that is the one thing that I've seen, because I've been in this space for 9 years, and I've seen a change even within the last,
Yeah.
8, 9 years, of the conversation and how it's presented. What you said earlier about not being able to talk about it,
Hmm.
to me sounds really isolating. Just feeling completely alone. You don't have anyone to say anything to. You're afraid to talk about it because you don't want to be perceived as weak. You're afraid of losing your job, whatever that fear might be. And as a result of that, you saw firsthand how you and the agency lost good people,
Hmm.
people leaving the
Absolutely.
profession. What other things did you see as a result of not dealing with some of the things that you experienced? Did you see any sort of, um, coping mechanisms or anything else that people were kind of soothing to be able to process those things in that isolated state?
I think for me personally, what ultimately it did is it made me a very quiet person when I wasn't at work. It made me a reserved person when I was at work. You didn't discuss those bad things among other officers, other deputies. You kept it all bottled inside. I think looking back on the years, um, it makes for a lonely life. When you were originally taught you stay quiet about it at home, you're weak if you talk about it at work. And I think it leads to problems at home.
Yeah,
For me, it did. It led to a lot of problems. Um, you, when you're in a relationship, whether it be you're married or you're just in a relationship, one partner always picks up when something's wrong with the other. And in the early days, you were taught to say nothing's wrong, but it's obvious something is. And that creates problems there. Um, at one point, law enforcement or public safety in general had one of the highest divorce rates.
yeah,
It had one of the highest alcoholism rates. It had one of the highest suicide rates. And I think our past practices led to a lot of that. It brought a lot of it forward. I've worked with agencies that I've lost good friends to suicides. I've worked at agencies where a majority of the agency had been divorced at least once. I will tell you, in my early career, it led to my divorce. Um, you look back at those things and you think, well, what could I have done different on them? And I think the most important thing was having somebody that you could feel comfortable just talking with.
Yeah.
But it was hounded in. The things you do here, you can't take home. Don't take them home. Don't say anything about them at home. And that creates division in the house. So it's a horrible place to be.
Yeah. And I agree that I think we severely undervalue the power of conversation.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be anything more than how can you just offload those things and how can you just feel like you're not alone in this thing, in this life, in your career. What was the tipping point, do you think? If you can kind of look back, we talked a little bit before about how we've made great strides. Wellness is now becoming more of the forefront. A lot of things are changing. The conversation about wellness is changing. Was there a certain time where you started to see that shift happen? Why do you think that started to happen, maybe universally as a profession? And I know this is a third part question, so if you forget all of them, I can repeat, but how did you learn? Because you said like you were raised in this career to be totally opposite, to
Yeah.
not talk about. How did you, as a leader, learn to evolve and adapt to this new way of thinking and, prioritizing wellness?
I will tell you for me, and I think many people out there, is after 9/11, when
Mm,
we had servicemen and women going all over fighting. After that wound down, there was a big recruitment push to bring some of those service members into law enforcement. And most of those people came back with traumatic experiences. And they began to form small groups to just talk about those experiences. And that helped me. We had several in our agency, one of the agencies I was with in Georgia. And just knowing that somebody had been through those same feelings, we shared those in common, um, made it more comfortable to talk. And I think we saw a huge shift then. We started seeing things become not normalized. You can't normalize any of those things that occur, but it was okay to talk about it. It was okay to express it to people you were with, knowing that a lot of times those in the military had experienced much worse, but they were able to deal with it. They were able to communicate what bothered them about it, what woke them up at night. And I think that's when we started seeing a change in it for general first responders, for law enforcement. And I think that was huge. I think that's helped tremendously.
yeah. I really appreciate, I think it's such a powerful statement for you to say, that helped me. To hear a
Absolutely.
leader say, hey, like I started to be able to talk about it. I realized that other people were also going through this, and then that helped me. And one of the conversations that I've had before, and I really believe this to be true, but I'd love your perspective on this as well, is the power of sharing your story, the things that have helped you, where you found success, so that that gives other people around you permission to also seek out those same things. Do you feel that it's almost an obligation as a leader to share those things?
Absolutely. Here at this current agency, very young agency, we're in a rural community. Not a lot of things have ever happened, but in the past several years, those have increased.
Mm.
And the officers are always hesitant, especially those with some time under their belt, to say anything. And I've found myself sharing my experiences, especially the instant that I told you of the suicide. Um, and that gets them to open up. They open up realizing that, hey, you're not just the chief that's sitting behind the desk. You were out there just like us,
Yeah.
and you've experienced things. And I think that helps break barriers. It helps get somebody in their comfort zone to discuss what's happened to them. Um, and we see a total different perspective there. These officers are able to come in and know you're not just telling me something that's made up. This is something you went through. These are feelings that you've had. And I think it helps, again, not normalize, but to the best we can, normalize their feelings.
Yeah. I think, what we talked about earlier is like, how can we create a space and an environment that is less isolating? How can we create a space where everyone understands that there's a human element to this
Mhm.
and that there are shared experiences? And while everyone's going to experience different things in different ways, we all go through stuff. That's the part of life, whether that's professional stuff, personal stuff, and it's okay. And if you have a feeling or a reaction to something, that is you being human, but how do we create forward momentum to be able to process those things, talk about those things, and then move forward stronger because of or in spite of those things? And one of the things that I've been seeing lately, and I think it's really kind of an interesting shift, and I'm interested to see if you've kind of seen this too on your end, but I think before, so when I started this 9 years ago, um, there was an I had someone come up to me from leadership and they were like, "Hey, this is not a part of our culture. It never will be. Cops don't do this stuff, but they're like, if you want to volunteer your time and do it for free, we won't say no." That was kind of the mentality when I started. And obviously, every agency is different, every leadership's going to be different, but that was my experience. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, let's see how it goes. Over time, what I've noticed is that I'm not going to say all, but a lot of leadership teams are on board with wellness. This is a big priority for many chiefs, command staff across the country. What I'm starting to see now is a lot of the stigma is coming more from peer-to-peer pressure.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing in this space right now?
So I will tell you you're spot on. You have a mix up of ages. Some of the older generation still hangs on to what I was taught. We try to break that. We have, for instance, people that are employed that have generational law enforcement. My dad was a cop. My granddad was a cop. And you see that kind of stigma there. They don't want to talk about it. There are ways to break that. I know a lot of agencies, probably most that I've ever dealt with, now have peer-to-peer support.
Mhm.
So you have a wide variety of officers that are on those peer-to-peer support groups that are there to talk to officers struggling. There's always this written and unwritten rule that you don't share those items with anybody else unless there's a potential of immediate intervention that's needed.
Yeah.
I think most agencies now have gone to having somebody available professionally. And I know for us, any critical incident, it's mandatory that you go see somebody professionally. Um, we have also tried to normalize it by bringing in family members. So if we have a young officer and the spouse needs to talk to somebody because this is a very tough field, not just on the person involved in it. It's tough for your entire family.
Right.
It's tough for my wife. We've been married 25 years. Um, and after our first child was born, it wasn't just, well, Mike, you might not come home to me. It's what am I going to tell our kids if something happens? So we open up that support for the family. That then makes it okay to discuss these things at home. You still don't go into your details on things that you can't talk about, but that makes it okay to talk at home. Again, I was raised in it. You don't talk, you don't say anything at home. You keep it quiet. You don't need to talk to anybody. If you do, you don't need to be in the business. So tons of things there, but we still have to work on that stigma from inside um, with older officers, younger officers, officers that have heard the same things. You got to be tough to be in this. You can't talk about those things. And I think the more that personally that we've seen that we forced that interaction with a professional and peer-to-peer support groups, that's starting to break down.
Mm,
The stigma is starting to go away because it's no longer, oh, what were you doing on the virtual visit with a counselor? Because everybody involved in that incident has to do the same thing.
yeah.
So I think that helps. That helps us break those walls down. And we have come tremendous ways since some of us got involved in this.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you brought up this question of voluntary or mandatory, and
Mhm.
that you shared your success with mandating after a critical incident. Everyone goes and they talk to someone, no
Yes,
questions asked, and now you can't judge each other for it because
exactly.
everyone did it, and no one knows what you said behind closed doors. No one knows if you said anything behind closed doors, but the fact that everyone went through it, now there's no judgment. I think that's really interesting. A lot of leadership I talk to, there is that question, what do we do? Do we
Hmm.
mandate it, or do we not? And I think the conversations have started to kind of expand out beyond critical incident, as far as what is worth mandating, what isn't, and how far do you go? And I think it'll be interesting to see. And I predict that every agency across the country will, at the very least, mandate post-critical incident. Um,
Absolutely.
and so we're not there yet, but I would suspect that at a bare minimum, that's going to be mandated across the board.
I will tell you that, again, it is mandatory you do it after a critical incident. It is not mandatory that you continue,
Right.
but we have never had an officer that just went to the mandatory.
Wow.
They would start out, I can see them in my office now. Oh, Chief, I don't have to do this, do I? Yes, you do.
Hmm.
But beyond that point, it's continued.
Hmm.
These officers have continued to talk to these people, and we cover that cost. We
Yeah.
don't ask them to foot any of it. We cover it because, for me personally, it's the best thing we can do. You build a stronger department that way. You build a more resilient officer that way. Um, Again, I don't get anything back from the service that we use. There is nothing discussed unless it is an imminent threat to the officer or somebody else. Short of that, it's odd. You always get that hesitation when you say you have to.
Hmm.
But again, I've never had one that only did the one.
Yeah, that's
They
such a
continue
powerful
to go.
statement. That is such a powerful statement. The first step is the hardest,
Mhm.
and anything new or any sort of change is hard, and I think we can all relate to that in some way or another. We like what we know. We like the comfortability of the known. The unknown is when things start to get a little bit wonky, and people are fearful of that. What I find to be really interesting, I had someone else bring this up. They said, we never ever get pushback when we say you have to wear your uniform this certain way.
Mhm.
You have to, shine your boots or whatever it is. You have to go to this sort of training. You have to do firearms every year. Like there's no pushback on certain things as saying you have to do this. And I do, again, this is gonna be another prediction. I think that this idea of you have to do this as far as your mental health, I think that that will become just like some of the other initiatives that you have or policies that you have.
I absolutely agree with you. And it's amazing to see that happening. It's amazing to see the officers. Um, I will tell you, I've had some come in and tell me, I'm glad you told me I had to go.
I love that.
And that's amazing.
Mhm.
That is an amazing accomplishment to look back 37 years ago and know what it was then.
Yeah.
Um, so it's wonderful to see it happening.
I just got chills because I thought as you're speaking, we talked about earlier how you want to get to the end of your career and look back and say, if I helped just one person. And this conversation that we're having, it proves that you've helped more than one person. And you can look back on your career and know that you were a part of this change and this forward movement with wellness. So it kind of gave me chills. I really appreciate the work that you've done, and I know it can't be
Thank you.
easy, especially coming from an environment that you were raised in of the complete opposite, to have the ability to adapt and change your perspective as you've progressed in your career through leadership in order to be able to help others is really commendable.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So we talked now about the past, the present, and a couple times we've both mentioned we still always think that there's room for improvement, right? I
Yeah.
think that you always have to look at the future and say, what's next? What are things that can be done differently or better? What do you think the future of mental wellness in the first responder profession looks like?
It's difficult to say based on what I've already experienced here. Again, I told you we are extremely rural. We
Mhm.
are kind of isolated in the state. We're the northwest corner of our state. We have our closest city um, is 3 hours away.
Mm,
We don't have a lot of mental health professionals in this area. Um, So one of the things that you look at and say, what does the future hold? And I can fully understand being here. Well, we can't do that because we don't have them available. But you look at what we're doing right now. We're on Zoom.
mhm.
And fortunately, we have some very good professionals in the state. We have some that were prior law enforcement and saw the need for these services and went back to school, furthered their education. And we do them virtually now. We are 4 hours from Denver, which is where majority of the professionals are. Um, but even immediately after a critical incident, the officer can get on their phone and hit the Zoom link or hit the text to talk link, and they're communicating with somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most impressive things that you would think eventually we're going to have that to say we have it now.
Mhm.
It's already here. Um, I would love to see us in the future to a point that we have zero first responders killed by suicide. I would love to see us in the future where we had zero due to mental health illness officers that are alcoholics. I would love to see in the future that we have zero broken homes because of the stress you've had at work, the way you were brought up in this job. Um, it's it's down the road. We have to realize that all three of those things are not just job related, but oddly enough, to be in a profession where you're the top in each of those categories tells you that we have a problem.
Mm.
I think every year we see it decrease on all those, but I would love to look back 20 years from now and say we now have zero. We have zero related to the job.
You and I share that same hope for the future. I think that that would be incredible if we can get there. And I'm really excited for the future. I do think that at the very least, we're talking about it now.
Hmm.
You know, there's awareness, there's education, there's resources. And I do think that technology, you know, we could have a whole separate conversation about the pros and the cons of technology all over. I do think from a wellness perspective, there are a lot of really great things that are done that are incorporating technology to make wellness more accessible, to create a environment 24/7 for first responders to have the resources that they need. And I really do hope that one day that we can get to a point that you said that there's zeros across the board. So thank you. We know that the younger men and women who are entering into this career now are going to be tomorrow's leaders. And
Yes.
so, what words of wisdom would you share with individuals who are earlier in their career? You know, maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier in your career or something that's helped you along the way.
I can tell you, wish to know or wished I had learned early is learn how to balance work life. Getting into this profession, I was one of those that I worked every bit of overtime I could. It had nothing to do with needing the money from the overtime. It was that I just wanted to immerse myself into it. Um, if in those years I had have said, all right, it's okay to do it occasionally, but I need some time for me. I need to decompress. I need some time to be with the family. I think things would have been much smoother. I think they would have been a lot easier. So that would be number one. Make time for you away from the job and keep your time with the job. Because if you don't, you're going to have problems in the future. Um, I, you look back, I can think of my early years into it, and gosh, every time somebody would finally be able to retire, they were dead within a year. And it is because you waited so long to retire, and because this is all you've ever done. This was your whole life. I love my job, but I don't want my job to define me. I want to define my job. And that is such an important lesson, such an important lesson. Uh, Other things to know is, gosh, set a goal to treat everybody the way you want to be treated. That relieves your stress. That that puts you in a space that you're able to function better. And then lastly, have a decompressor.
Mm.
I love the outdoors. I love being outside, whether it's hunting, fishing, whether it's riding my ATV. Those are my times that I can go, not have to say a word. I just enjoy outside. Everybody's not into outdoors, but find your decompressor. Um, Ironically, in talking about mental health, I can't think of a state where you can be a police officer. And I can't think if you're in the same state and go to a different agency where you can go and don't have to have a physical agility, a physical exam, and a psychological exam.
Mhm.
Maybe we should make that an annual thing for all three. You do your physical agility, you do your physical, and you have a well check with a professional. I know that that's gaining traction, but don't bottle things up. Don't keep them to yourself. Don't believe the rhetoric. You can't talk about this. Don't believe that, oh, it makes you weak. What it does is it makes you strong to be able to communicate.
I agree. Thank you. And you gave a lot of really amazing words of wisdom. The one thing that really kind of stuck out to me, like I felt like you were speaking to me personally, and I'm going to take it with me because I'm very, very guilty of pouring everything that I have into my career, is this idea of don't let the job define who you are. You define the job. And to have an identity outside of what you do and to take
Absolutely.
care of you.
Um, I've had, while I was in law enforcement, several other careers. So uh, I was a paramedic, was for over 30 years. I worked with the coroner's office. Um, and I'll never forget one of the EMS instructors that I had when I went through paramedic school. And 911, I got into it when there was no 911. You called a number. So we preached all over news, all in papers, all in magazines, all on billboards, dial 911. And then suddenly we get inundated with stuff that never called for an ambulance. And we were talking about it in class, and the instructor said, it's sad because it's not your emergency, it's their emergency. And that goes right back to what you're talking about. It's each individual has their limit on things, each individual has their struggles with things, and we need to be compassionate about what those are.
Yeah.
We need to be understanding that, hey, just because it isn't the way I believe, just because I would never call 911 for this, I don't know where they're at. I don't know what's happened to them in the past. And that's much the way the culture is in law enforcement. You can take a room with my 28 employees here and put them in a room, and they've all had different experiences with things. I truly believe the culture started to change after 9/11. After we got all the service people back, um, it was one of the biggest changes in my life.
Mm.
It for once, I felt like, well, I'm not the one that's crazy by thinking I need to talk to somebody. There are other people involved in that. Now, I certainly pray that it never takes another 9/11 to move us forward. And I would love to see zeros, but if we can drop one a year, if our trend can keep coming down, I think we've accomplished something.
Yeah.
We focus on the physical, we focus on you got to be physically fit, but mental is a totally different thing. And that's sad. It's sad. I know what it did to me. I know what I've seen it done to friends, to supervisors. Um, the sergeant I had that walked away from the job, the 1 year anniversary of the incident, he walked in and says, I just can't forget it. I turned my notice in today. I can't do it anymore. And he was one of those people that could always talk people down. He, you know, he very rarely had to fight anybody. And he was the type of person you still need in this field, but he couldn't deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, gosh, I would give anything to go back to my start date and not be afraid to say something. To say the day I got called in the major's office, say, I need to talk to somebody. But what will it take? Gosh, I don't know. I don't know how we finally cross that hurdle. I think the mandating after critical incident but leaving it wide open for as many as you want to go. I thought our approach was it's not just the officer, it's the family if they need to see somebody. Um, and I think the at least yearly check-in. We might have to get to a point that it's mandatory for a quarterly check-in.
Yeah.
But if we can do that, and if we can convince city governments, county governments that, hey, this is worth it, maybe that helps.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Chief Cochran. I really, really appreciate you coming on here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.